of the things that you talk about in the first phase, which is empathy, that leaders need to have when it comes to both the people that they're leading as well as their other stakeholders as well. Maybe if you can double down on that, double click on that, and talk to us about what are some of the things that leaders can do. Number one, to have to be empathetic towards the people that they're leading, because even the leaders themselves are going through the crisis. They are also in that phase where they want to first secure themselves and what they want to do from a crisis mode, and then probably look at stability and growth as well. And they are going through difficult times as well. So given that that's the case, how can one go about having empathy for others? And maybe you also talk about trust at a later point in time in your book as well. Maybe if you can just link both those, if there is a link. I think there is, but if you think there is a link as well, maybe link how that kind of how that empathy leads to the trust, which can then enable leaders to be much more effective than they would otherwise be.
Yeah, okay. It's interesting question, Mukesh. Interesting the way that you framed that. So there's some research done early in the pandemic, and again, I'm going to quote some Australian research here because that's where most of our work is done. But this applies universally. So there's a university in Australia called Macquarie University, and they did some research in the middle of 2020. So right at the early part of the pandemic, people didn't really know what was going to happen in the future, right in the crisis point. And they looked at leaders around Australia and they tried to identify what the best leaders were doing. And they came up with this metaphor, which I love. I wish I thought of it myself. They call it the avocado leader. So the avocado leader, they say, the best leaders in times of crisis are like an avocado. So they have the hard inner core, which is looking at business outcomes and KPIs and performance and making sure that the business or the organization is still meeting its goals. But it also has a soft outer layer, which is looking after the people. And so the best leaders are doing both of those things in a crisis. Now, it's actually true that the best leaders do that at all times, crisis or not. And the crisis just means it requires all leaders to step up. And so around the soft outer layer are things like empathy and trust. And empathy, people will have different definitions of it. But to me, I think the key part of this is understanding the motivation behind people's behavior. So it's doing a little bit of mind reading here, because if I'm trying to understand what you're going through, Mukesh, I can't read your mind. I don't know what emotions you're feeling. All I can do is judge that by what I can see, what I can hear. If we were there physically, we could touch. And it's really everything that we get is through our five senses. And then we make up in our head what the other person is thinking, feeling, and what they're going through. And empathy is saying, actually, I'm not going to judge just my own mind reading. It's actually trying to find out what's the motivation behind your behavior. So the behavior is what I see and hear, but what's actually going on, and it's me understanding that better. So it's really, really important for leaders to do. And I don't want to only say that it's relevant in times of crisis. It's not. For all leaders at all times, that skill of empathy is more important than ever before. And it's one of those outer layers of the avocado. Same with trust. And I just want to make a distinction here, Mukesh, because I'm not quite, well, let me put it this way. There's two ways of looking at trust. There's a leader being trusted. So how do I build trust so that people trust me? And I think the more valuable part of trust in the future is leaders trusting their people, even the more junior people, even the people who've been in the organization for less, who've come in from outside the industry, who don't have the years of experience that the leaders do. They don't have necessarily the depth of technical expertise. But I think it's more important now than ever before for leaders to build trust in their people. And the reason I say that is because leadership has changed. and it's changed in a radical way. And the way it's changed is that in the past, like say if you've been a leader for 20 to 30 years, 20 or 30 years ago, if you're thinking about what's the future going to look like, the future was moving more slowly. So the future would look more like the past. So all your years of experience and everything you've learned in the past was probably going to stand you in good stead for being able to lead in the future. Now that's no longer the case. It's not that everything that you knew is completely useless. It's just that it's not automatically useful. And leaders really, like, you need a bit of humility to be able to say, you know what? So look, for me, it's been probably 30 years since I had my first leadership role. And I've got to be able to say, you know what, the stuff that I learned as a leader 30 years ago, I shouldn't automatically assume that it's going to serve me well as a leader in the future. There are other people who've got different experience, different expertise, diverse ways of thinking, lots of different lived experiences, and they are as qualified, sometimes even more qualified, to understand the future than I am. And I think that's I think a more valuable part of trust. It's a little bit harder for leaders to do sometimes, to start trusting their people. So if you want to go deeper in that, happy to do that. But I think that's
Really,
more valuable.